Joseph's children. I welcome you here today. It's such a pleasure to see all of you with us. There's a lot of energy. You can feel it in this room. There's lots of hopes. There's lots of dreams. Let's keep dreaming. That's why we're here together. I want to introduce some dignitaries that have joined us here today. We have Mayor Alan Weber with us. Thank you, Mayor, for joining us today. We have the chairwoman of the Santa Fe County Commission, Anna Hansen. Thank you. We also have with us, I don't know if she's arrived yet or not, will be with us as Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez. So we're happy that she's here with us, hearing these important presentations. And to welcome us and to begin our afternoon, Archbishop Wester.
Everybody. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm here to welcome you. I want to thank Father Darrell Segura, our pastor, for his hospitality. I want to thank all those who have worked so hard for this afternoon. This is an interfaith prayer service, and our intention is world peace. And we are committing ourselves to the very clear fact that the non-negotiable step to world peace is multilateral, verifiable nuclear disarmament. And so that's the focus of our prayer today. So welcome from different faith traditions, different backgrounds. One and all, you're most welcome.
To call us to prayer, I want to introduce the Reverend Talitha Arnold, pastor of United Church of Santa Fe.
Go ahead, Mary and Fiona. Thank you all. I'd like to also, in addition to the thanks that Archbishop Wester offered, to give a big thanks to the steering committee, that has been a part of working hard for the last several months to pull all of this together. And a special shout out to Thea Calloway, organizer par excellence, to Ann Avalon of the Archbishop's office, and Maria Garcia, who is the administrative assistant in that office, working closely with Ann. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and we all are the beneficiaries of it. So thank you, Ann, thank you, Thea, and thank you, Maria, very much. Prayer is going to be interwoven throughout our time together today, both at the beginning, in the middle, and then also at the end as we go out. And in all of our traditions, whether it's Catholic, Protestant, Buddhist, Jewish, all indigenous, all different kinds of traditions, prayer comes in a variety of ways: singing, silence, spoken. And so today we begin with both spoken prayers, also breathing in God's peace, and then also singing. So I invite us to come together as we do at the church that I serve, the United Church of Santa Fe, a United Church of Christ here in Santa Fe, by breathing in God's Spirit. And then Dr. Mary Hosba Russell, who is of the Diné Navajo Nation and also a psychiatrist here in town, will be offering the prayer of the four sacred mountains from her tradition. And then that will be followed by Kiara Cortez, who is a student at the University of New Mexico in voice and also a member of one of our choral scholars at United Church of Santa Fe, offering the beloved spiritual, This Little Light of Mine. And you'll hear that sound, you'll hear that song all the way through. On a day in which we remember a terrible light that took place in our beloved state decades ago, may we also remember that light that comes to us in so many other blessed kinds of ways. So with all of that as an introduction, I invite us first to simply gather and to breathe in the very breath of God. In Hebrew, breath, ruach, spirit, wind, they all have the same meaning. Sometimes it's great gulps of breath, sometimes it's inspiring breath, sometimes it's just the breath to get out of bed in the morning or to take the next step. But whatever we do or however we experience, the breath of God comes to us as peace and as hope and as love. So let us take a moment and breathe in those gifts. Let us breathe in deeply the spirit of peace. Let us breathe in deeply the spirit of hope. And let us breathe in the spirit of deep abiding love. And may that breath be the breath of peace that passes all understanding. May that hope be the spirit of hope that overcomes all despair. And may that breath of love be that love that will not let us go and will not let us down. Amen. Mary?
Mary Hasba Russell. I'd like to offer a prayer from the 4 sacred mountains of the Navajo tradition to center us this afternoon. To the east, Cisnagena. Oh, how the beautiful and strong White Shell Mountain stands in the east. It is dressed with a spirit of white shell thinking, which makes my feelings and thoughts strong and makes my mind beautiful. Dawn boys' and dawn girls' voices echo clearly within my thoughts, and the bluebirds singing ahead of me tell me I am safe and protected. To the south, Sodzilth. Oh, how the beautiful and positive turquoise mountain stands with plans of life and knowledge in the south direction, which I may think, plan, and prepare myself to fulfill my life. My life is beautiful. To the west, Dukoslid. Oh, how the beautiful and powerful Abalone Shell Mountain stands in the west, which is my growth. The yellow evening twilight boy and girl, their song so soft, tell me that I am loved and that I am a unique Dene. From the special place where you dwell, mother-changing woman, watch over and protect me. To the north, Debensa. Oh, how the beautiful and strong Black Jet Mountain stands in the north direction. It is dressed with black jet clothes, which is my awareness of life. The folded darkness boy and girl tell me, my child, rest and have a life filled with interest and desire.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
thank you for calling us to prayer. I'd like to introduce and to welcome Archbishop John Wester, Archbishop, Catholic Health Initiatives, and CHI St. Joseph's Children. They want to present you with a donation of $3,000 for your work this summer with the Catholic Bishops of Japan.
Thank you very much, Alan. That's the quickest answer to prayer I've ever experienced. That's wonderful. Well, thanks be to God. Appreciate that. And again, my words of welcome to all of you, and each and every one of you is so important here. All of you are working in one way or another toward this goal of disarmament and peace in our world, and many of you doing so many things for so many years. I see so many. It's been a great honor for me to meet so many of you in this important work. So welcome one and all, and especially to those online as well. We acknowledge you, and we know that you're with us. We can't see you, but we know you're there, and we're glad that you're there as well. And so greetings. May God bless all of us here on this somewhat hot afternoon. I'm so gratified to see so many people of different faiths, or even no faith at all, different traditions, different backgrounds, to dialogue on nuclear disarmament. May all of us be blessed in this critical work. This turnout today, including those online, attests to the pent-up public demand to address the harms of the past nuclear arms race and the dangers of this new nuclear arms race. Concerning past harms, I point to the Tularosa Basin Trinity test downwinders, the first people to ever suffer radioactive fallout, represented here by Tina Cordova and Paul Pino. It is far past time that New Mexican downwinders are justly compensated by our government. Concerning today's nuclear weapons issues, I point to the town hall meeting held this last April, organized by Santa Fe County Commissioner Anna Hansen, who is also with us here. Anna, thank you so much. It blew the National Nuclear Security Administration away when more than 400 people showed up to voice their concerns. Today, we're helping to build a future world free of nuclear weapons. But needless to say, it can't stop here. In a few weeks, the Archbishop of Seattle, Paul Etchen, and I will meet our Japanese brothers and sisters in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to discuss nuclear disarmament on the anniversaries of the atomic bombings there. Thank you. Yeah, please pray for that. Thank you. Our goal is global, verifiable nuclear disarmament. And what is so radical about that? After all, the officially declared policy of the United States is nuclear disarmament, as pledged to in the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty, but tragically never honored by any nuclear weapons power. In November of 2019, Pope Francis declared from Hiroshima and Nagasaki that the possession of atomic weapons is immoral. He thus began a global dialogue on nuclear disarmament that we hope can continue. My home church here in downtown Santa Fe is the Sacred Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, the venerable saint from whom the Pope has taken his papal name. But next to this place of peace, as many know, less than 100 footsteps away is 109 East Palace Avenue, the historic gateway to the secret Los Alamos lab during World War II. I want to make St. Francis Cathedral a gateway to peace and nuclear disarmament. Today, 78 years after the atomic bombings, the lab is aggressively expanding the production of the radioactive cores of nuclear weapons, known as plutonium pits. This is the single most critical part of the government's $2 trillion plan to completely rebuild existing nuclear weapons with new military capabilities and buy, at enormous taxpayers' expense, new missiles, submarines, and bombers to deliver them. This is nuclear weapons forever. We are in a new nuclear arms race that is arguably more dangerous than the first. New cyber and hypersonic systems, artificial intelligence, and multiple nuclear adversaries are increasing the grave risks, even as climate change and growing economic inequality accelerate global instability. The old rationale that we need thousands of nuclear weapons for the declared rationale of deterrence is false, when only a few hundred weapons are truly needed for just deterrence. Yet, the United States and Russian governments reject minimal deterrence in order to keep nuclear warfighting capabilities, contrary to their public rhetoric that a nuclear war can never be won. There is probably more money spent in the Archdiocese here of Santa Fe on nuclear weapons than any other Catholic diocese in our country. This is because of the Los Alamos and Sandia National Laboratories and the Kirtland Air Force Base, which has the largest repository of nuclear warheads in the country. Given the prominence of nuclear weapons in the land entrusted to our spiritual care, the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, I believe, has a special responsibility to advocate for and provide guidance toward a future free of nuclear weapons. This is what our Savior Jesus Christ and St. Francis would want us to do, and so many others in so many traditions represented here today. There will be inevitably those who will call us naive for thinking that we can rid the world of nuclear weapons. But who is it that's really naive? Robert McNamara, Defense Secretary during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, said that human civilization survived only by luck. Counting on luck is not a winning strategy. The history of nuclear weapons is replete with near misses, miscalculations, and accidents. With the war now in Ukraine, and we must make that also an intention of our prayer today, we are now facing the most serious nuclear threats since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Isn't it the height of naivete to think that humanity can survive on into the future as long as nuclear weapons exist? Certainly so. The Vatican itself has evolved from conditional acceptance of so-called deterrence during the Cold War to becoming the first nation state to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And what is so radical about that? There have long been banned treaties outlawing chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction. I seek to make nuclear disarmament a pro-life issue, not only within the Catholic Church, but also within the hearts and souls of all good women and men. After all, what could be more pro-life than to rid the planet of the only weapons capable of ending God's creation right here on this, our only earth? We will prevail in the fight to abolish nuclear weapons so that humanity can continue to evolve in God's light. The alternative is abysmal darkness of nuclear winter, which people of conscience cannot abide. Let us then dedicate ourselves toward this end. Thank you all so very much for being here this afternoon. God bless you all.
Thank you, Archbishop. Wanted to acknowledge that Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez has joined us. Thank you for being with us here today. It's an important meeting. Thank you. To speak and share with us on the history of nuclear presence in New Mexico, I invite and introduce Dr. Myrriah Gomez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. What is today called New Mexico was colonized in the late 1500s by Spanish conquistadores in search of the 3 Gs: gold, God, and glory. They did not find gold as they had predicted, and the leaders of the colonizing expeditions, such as Hernán Cortés, Juan de Oñate, or Diego de Vargas, can no longer be viewed as heroes due to the brutality they enacted on indigenous peoples. But the Catholicism they brought has mostly persisted. Churches were constructed in every Pueblo community, and indigenous people were forced to convert to Catholicism. It was this early Spanish colonialism that laid the foundation for 2 later periods of settler colonialism, American and nuclear. During the U.S.-Mexico War, many battles were waged in New Mexico, and among them, one of the most gruesome was the siege at Pueblo de Taos. On February 4, 1847, American military attacked the Catholic Church, setting fire to its roof and eventually forming a hole in the thick adobe walls in order to blast cannons inside the church. Men, women, and children who were trapped inside were murdered, and many who escaped were murdered before nightfall. The implications of both Spanish and American colonialism on the development and destruction of the Catholic Church as both artifact and institution can be easily identified and traced. It is not, however, as clear how nuclear colonialism has had a tangible impact on the Catholic Church. In January 2022, Archbishop John C. Wester announced the impact of nuclear colonialism on the Archdiocese of Santa Fe in his pastoral letter, Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a conversation toward nuclear disarmament. It was the first time that many New Mexicans were confronted with how nuclearism both supports and is supported by the institution of the Catholic Church in New Mexico. New Mexicans have bore the brunt of nuclear colonialism. Nuclear colonialism is the state-sponsored occupation of indigenous homelands that results in the displacement and or elimination of indigenous peoples in favor of preserving a nuclear economy. Nuclear colonialism is a system of domination through which governments and corporations disproportionately target and devastate indigenous communities and their lands to maintain the nuclear production process. I would add to this definition what Patrick Wolf says about settler colonialism, that the colonizers come to stay. Invasion is a structure, not an event. While nuclear colonialism shares many of the same attributes as settler colonialism, there is a distinction that warrants a different theorization. Nuclear colonialism is a neo-colonial framework that targets not only indigenous people, but also other ethnic minority groups in poor economic situations that have become disenfranchised because of state occupation of their homelands. Nuclear colonialism commenced in the U.S. during World War II when the U.S. established its then-secret Manhattan Project, a multi-site nuclear research and design project that developed the atomic bombs that were used to attack Japan in 1945. It can be categorized as a new mode of imperialism, even though it manifested during wartime and via territorial occupation. It is perpetuated through economic means or government policies and practices. After occupying indigenous and Hispanic homelands and Black communities in the South as part of the Manhattan Project, U.S. imperial forces expanded their colonial project using existing laws and policies such as eminent domain and created new ones. This resulted in a new economic system built around nuclear weapons production. As nuclear energy became more useful for non-weapons production, the nuclear industrial complex grew. With it, as the U.S. became a fully operational nuclear industrial complex, every stage of the nuclear production moved within its borders and, more importantly, were located on indigenous homelands, ranging from uranium mining to waste disposal. During World War II, the U.S. government, via President Harry Truman, tasked the Manhattan Project with developing a nuclear weapon that would end the war. The government evicted over 30 Hispano farming families from the Pajarito Plateau and prevented local Pueblo peoples from accessing their homelands. There is no question that the first victims of the atomic bomb were the residents of New Mexico. Nuevo Mexicano communities like San Antonio, Luis Lopez, Carrizoso, and Tularosa, to name a few, experienced environmental racism at the advent of the atomic bomb. Atmospheric nuclear testing is seldom discussed in environmental racism or environmental justice studies. Rather, and especially when it comes to New Mexico, uranium extraction is often the commonly discussed nuclear example of environmental racism. It has produced some of the most notorious examples of environmental racism and is widely discussed in the literature. In fact, today is not only the anniversary of the Trinity test of July 16, 1945, but also the anniversary of the Church Rock uranium spill of July 16, 1979. The fact that these two nuclear disasters share the same date is not coincidental. These are two examples of nuclear colonialism in rural New Mexican communities and what makes today such an emotionally and politically charged day. After Trinity, scientists and doctors who monitored the test were solely concerned with the short-term radiation exposure, and they neglected to investigate the long-term exposure endured by these communities even after they became aware that radiation exposure could cause, for example, leukemia. Thus, they allowed these life-threatening pollutants to pervade these communities, and people of color were exposed to harmful radiation through soil and groundwater contamination, primarily. The federal government continues to neglect the Trinity downwinders by refusing them inclusion in the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or at minimum, issuing an apology. Indeed, Archbishop Wester has opened a new pathway for conversation, action, and healing. Young people often ask me how our communities in northern New Mexico, in particular, would survive without the labs. They understand the economic dependence we have on LANL especially, and they perhaps are less afraid of articulating the conundrum of dismantling the nuclear industrial complex without destroying our economic survival in a capitalist world. But the answer is simple, I tell them. We're not advocating for shutting down the lab, nor have I ever done so. We are asking for the abolition of nuclear weapons. The national scientific laboratories, of which New Mexico has two, would be able to more freely do scientific research with more money. We could cure cancer, cure HIV/AIDS, cure Alzheimer's. The Archdiocese of Santa Fe and all its parishes, including my own at Immaculate Conception in Tomé, and my familial parish of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe in Poaque, or where I actually went to Mass every Sunday growing up in San Ildefonso, can begin these dialogues. Begin to do God's work as proclaimed by the Holy See, beginning at the grassroots local level. I've thought a lot about the role of the church in abolishing nuclear weapons recently, and it makes perfect sense, really. Colonialism began in New Mexico with the Catholic Church. While we cannot change the past, we can grow the future. Let's end nuclear colonialism with the Catholic Church. As people here today of various convictions, faith or no faith, backgrounds and beliefs, we are united today with one purpose. Let us all work toward abolishing nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us. I have to say, from my hometown of Tomé, go Tomé. I want to acknowledge with us from the U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan's office, we have the field representative with us, Eric Chavez. Thank you for joining us. To reflect on the communities impacted by the nuclear industry, I want to welcome and introduce Tina Cordova.
Good afternoon, everybody. It certainly is a wonderful opportunity for me to be here today to share about the history that we've experienced as downwinders in the state of New Mexico. I just came off of a whirlwind weekend where we were in Las Cruces for 2 days of events, right? And those events went really well. And so it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you here today to share again. I want to thank, first of all, the Archbishop. Archbishop Wester, I admire your courage for doing what you're doing. It takes great courage to do what you do in our state, and I admire that. And I thank you also for acknowledging us, because it's the first time that we've been acknowledged by the Catholic Church in New Mexico, and you've done that on an ongoing basis, so thank you so much. I want to thank the organizing committee that I had the pleasure of working with the last few months on this beautiful day, for this beautiful day. It was a pleasure to work with them, and without key members, and I'm not going to go through the whole list, we wouldn't have the attention to detail that we're seeing today. So 18 years ago, I co-founded an organization called the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, or TBDC for short, with the late Fred Tyler. We both knew we had an inherent knowledge of how our community was not okay, how our community was sick and suffering and dying. And Fred and I decided that we had to speak up. We had to do something about that. He had just lost his mother. I had already been diagnosed with cancer. My father was sick with cancer. I had lost countless aunts and uncles and cousins to cancer. We knew that we had to do something to address this. And we truly believed that if we just brought it to the attention of the U.S. government, our government, the government that we pledge allegiance to, we truly thought that they would come back, acknowledge us, and take care of us. We were so very naive. That started 18 years ago. Imagine our shock when we found out that there had been a fund established in 1990 to take care of the downwinders of the Nevada test site, when we were the first people exposed to radiation any place in the world as a result of an atomic bomb. It added such insult to injury. It was unfathomable that our government had looked away from us while they were taking care of other people. I want to tell you just a brief couple of things about that bomb that I think you need to understand this history and how we've been affected. First of all, it was the only time that our government detonated a bomb on a platform 100 feet off the ground. That produces massive fallout. It doesn't produce destruction. And to give you an idea, the bombs detonated in Japan were detonated at 1,600 and 1,800 feet. So the bomb here created a radioactive cloud that ascended over 40,000 feet into the stratosphere. Actually, it surpassed the atmosphere. That bomb was very inefficient. It was overpacked with plutonium. A full 10 pounds of plutonium with a half-life of 24,000 years went up in that fireball. That's not the only radioactive isotope we were left to deal with. There was cesium and strontium that you concentrate in your bones. There was iodine that you concentrate in your thyroid gland. But there was plutonium, a full 10 pounds that went up in that fireball. To understand this history, you also have to understand our lifestyles. We didn't have running water in 1945 in the villages of New Mexico. We depended on the rain that fell. We collected it in cisterns, in holding ponds, in ditches, acequias, in rivers, in lakes. And water was a very sought-after commodity because it wasn't readily available. Now our water was contaminated. July 16th, 1945, there were massive rainstorms in New Mexico. It's our rainy season, right? Once that radioactive plutonium and the other radioactive isotopes were in our cisterns, they were there forever. We didn't have grocery stores because we didn't have electricity. So we didn't have a place where we went to buy dairy or produce or meat. All of that was produced at our homes by our own families. We had orchards and gardens. We had milk cows or dairies. There were 3 active dairies in Tularosa. And we raised cows and sheep and chickens. And we harvested all of that. And it would have been the peak of the harvest for us. And now our entire food source was contaminated. There's 3 ways you're exposed to radiation. Inhalation, so as the ash fell from the sky, we were inhaling it. We also were absorbing the radiation through our skin, okay? If you don't have running water, you don't bathe that often. So once that radiation was on our scalps and on our skin, it likely stayed there for a number of days before we were able to bathe and wash it away. And of course, we were ingesting through our water and our food. Now, because of that, we have this horrendous history of cancer. I'm the 4th generation in my family to have cancer since 1945. I had 2 great-grandfathers living in 1945 in Tularosa. In 1955, they were both diagnosed with stomach cancer. They were sent to El Paso. They were given morphine and sent home to die. And in a very short period of time, they did. And it was terrible the way that they suffered. Both my grandmothers had cancer. My dad died from cancer. 3 different cancers he didn't have risk factors for. My dad didn't smoke, didn't drink alcohol, didn't use chewing tobacco, had no viruses, and he got 2 distinctly different oral cancers. And of course, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer when I was 39, and the first thing they asked me was, when were you exposed to radiation? Did you work in a lab? Did you work with radioactive isotopes? Have you had a lot of x-rays? And I said no, no, and no, but I lived 45 miles away the crows fly from the Trinity test site, and I knew that was my exposure. In November, my 23-year-old niece, who's going to college in California studying art, wants to work at Pixar, was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. We now have 5 generations in my family. I wish I could say we're unique, but we're not. Bernice's family, Paul's family, Mary and Louise's family, Doris's family, they all have cancer like this. This is not unique to us, and it's not unique to Tularosa. It's what we see in the uranium mining communities. It's what we see in all the communities we go to. So I share this history with you because we need your help. We've been fighting in Congress for 13 years now to bring attention to this. We need to expand and amend the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to include the people of New Mexico for the first time ever. We will never fully know or understand the effect this has had on the people of New Mexico and our economy. And all of us are downwinders of something. Don't kid yourself. We're all downwind of something. And all of us have paid for this because it's had a huge economic impact on our state. And I want to take this moment to thank Representative Ledger Fernandez, who is a downwinder herself and who has fought very hard in Congress for us. We always needed a champion, and you have been that, and we respect that and regard that highly. And I just want to say that I want all of you to join with us as well. Please go to our website, www.trinitydownwinders.com, and you can learn everything that you'll ever want to know about our fight for justice. And now I'm asking all of you to join our fight for justice, the fight for the people of New Mexico who have been long ignored by our government. Thank you so much.
Tina, thank you very much for sharing that with us. We are all now on board with your fight. There's over 300 of us here today. We need to acknowledge the power in that, the power in each one of us being present, calling on God in your own tradition, in your own spirituality, in your own family. And we bring this, and I want to place that on Tina because your voice today is very important. To reflect on the impact on uranium workers in our communities, I welcome and thank and invite Larry King to share with us. Thank you, Larry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Larry King. I live in Church Rock, New Mexico, about 12 miles northeast of Gallup, New Mexico. I'll be 66 in 2 months, and I don't know if anybody is familiar with the old Western movies, Hallelujah Trail, but some of those sites were filmed around my area. Even from how they move the movie set from one area to the next area, they travel right next to my home to cross from one section to the other section. And I understand that the movie, you can see the head frame of the first mine site that was drilled in Church Rock area. The Phillips Petroleum sank their first mine in my area, about a mile away from where we used to live. And currently, I live about less than 1,000 feet from that abandoned mine site because of the complication of the land status in our area, the checkerboard area, and the Eastern Agency. Where I was born and raised, we couldn't have any infrastructure of anything because we were living on state land, but within half a mile from where we're living, that is tribal trust. And so as the years went by, we were able to get all the utilities that we have currently. So Phillips first sunk their shaft in about the late early 60s. And I graduated in 1975, went to work at UNC in October of 1975, the same year. And I started working as a surface laborer, eventually ending up as an underground surveyor for 8 years. And the only thing positive I always say from that uranium boom in my area is the State Highway 566 that was built from Church Rock to the mine sites, 12 miles, to the UNC site, and also serviced the Kermagee mine, which was less than a quarter of a mile north of the UNC mine. The only reason why the two mines were so close to each other was because of the Navajo Nation reservation boundary. Kermagee had their license to do mining on their reservation. UNC had their license to do mining on the checkerboard area. When UNC started, they said they were on private land, but later on in the years, Navajo Nation EPA was doing some investigation on trying to get the mine to do something with their mine waste. It was discovered there was a documentation that they were mining on tribal trusts all along. And so I worked at UNC. I was working the day of the July 16, 1979 uranium spill, which released over 94 million gallons of mill waste through the Perco Wash. And the Perco Wash abuts my grazing area on the east side and on the south side of where I live. And not to mention the abandoned mine of the first mine shaft, Phillips Petroleum, is on the west side. So I'm encircled in a mine waste, contamination of uranium. And the Perco Wash goes through the center of Gallup, New Mexico, all the way down parallel I-40 into Holbrook and Winslow. And I understand that the waste even reached a little Colorado River down in Winslow. But during after the spill, there was nothing ever done to do the cleanup. We've been addressing, trying to get the Navajo Nation EPA, the U.S. EPA to do some comprehensive health study. To this day, there is nothing that hasn't been done yet. Yesterday, we did our commemoration, spent 10 hours emceeing the event. So every year we've been doing that, trying to keep that awareness at the forefront so our elected official, tribal, federal, and state to do something with what we're calling for to get all that mine waste cleaned up. There's mine waste that was left behind by UNC mine and also Kermagee mine. A lot of these mines are always, the company move on, and the mine waste is always left behind for the communities to address and clean up. And that's what we're doing to this day. And not to mention the RECA, we also have post-71 workers. A majority are coming from Kermagee and UNC. And so that's another issue. We got one more year to do something with the, to expand the current RECA. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, and I know that was a very far travel, important message that you brought with us, and Blessings, Larry. We will now take a 15-minute intermission, a break, so you can stretch, and then we'll continue. Thank you. take your seats and we'll begin momentarily. Please take your seats.
See if this works. Oh, that's not going to work. You gotta. Can we regather? I know there's lots of people to talk to and lots of tables and all, but those of you who are staffing the tables, if you could encourage those who are looking at what you have at the tables to come find a seat again so we can really get started and get centered. We had a wonderful hour right before that now, and so let's take time and get centered once again. Okay? Yeah, I know, but they're not going to play for another hour. So, excuse me. Thanks. So let's come together again, please, and be together first in silence and then in breathing. And then I'd like to introduce Dr. Valerie Forsman, who is the guiding teacher at the Mountain Cloud Zen Center, who's going to lead us in a time of deeper prayer. And then Kiara Cortez will once again bless us with her songs of prayer. But let's take time after all that we've heard, and so many thanks to everyone who's spoken thus far today for their powerful witnesses in both what the past has been and also what the future can be. Before I head into that time, if you brought a cell phone into this sacred space, please take a moment and make sure it's turned off completely so that when we're in prayer, when we're listening to people's testimonies, when we are looking to the future, we're not also thinking about whose cell phone is going off. Okay? So just take it out. If you brought a cell phone, take it out. Make sure it's turned off completely for this period of time. And so once again, let's take a moment and breathe into our lives those gifts that we are offered. So let us breathe in deeply the gift of peace that this world needs and that we can help be about. Let us breathe in deeply the gift of hope that we need and this world needs. And let us breathe in the gift of love that is stronger than fear, stronger than hatred, stronger even than death itself. Thank you, and amen. Dr. Forsman?
So as we settle ever more deeply into this place of peace, this sacred place, gathering our hearts and minds into shared silence, resting in the breath, coming into the body, this body, here and now, and the one body, whole, borderless, and indivisible, and congruity with the Zen Buddhist precepts. We commit to ridding this world of the existential threat of nuclear weapons. We commit to embodying and advocating for a world whose abundance is available to all. We commit to practices of peace. Let us hear the imperative and respond. Peace be. Amen.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All through the night, I'm gonna let it shine. All through the night, I'm gonna let it shine. All through the night, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Amen.
Thank you. That was beautiful. To share with us a statement written by Charles Oppenheimer, we welcome and I want to introduce Alex Angeles and Max Heening.
Hello, I am Charles Oppenheimer. I'm going to quote my grandfather, J. Robert Oppenheimer, from October 16, 1945, as he spoke his final words as the leader of the Los Alamos Laboratory. Quote, "The peoples of this world must unite, or they will perish. This war, which has ravaged so much of the earth, has written these words. The atomic bomb has spelled them out for all men to understand." End quote. I believe the most important part of my grandfather's legacy is his advocacy for global unity and openness to deal with our scientific and technological growth that always outpaces our genuine understanding. His advice is still relevant, perhaps more so than ever. It is not too late to listen to him now. My grandfather and many other notable scientists, for example, Niels Bohr, as well as some statesmen, had great hope that the development of the bomb could end all wars before the first bomb was even completed. It was clear to them that there was no way to keep the science of fission secret. They also realized that bombs would inevitably get bigger and more powerful, but would never make us safer, and that there was no defense against them. My grandfather saw that the only way to avoid the danger of an arms race was through managing the risk together. This was a possibility that was almost implemented in 1947 with the Acheson-Lilienthal proposal, which unfortunately was undermined by our own government and was not implemented. In 1954, Robert Oppenheimer was attacked by the government. He had committed the crime of insufficient enthusiasm for building a yet bigger hydrogen bomb and was vilified as if he had a character flaw. The U.S. tried secrecy while building weapons and got the arms race the scientists warned against. Very few people now claim the nuclear arms race was good for us. We have managed to survive so far, but we still must work together on the shared threat that we humans have created. In 1945, we were not ready to hear that the only path to safety was cooperating with scientific openness. Maybe we are ready for that message now. Humans evolved to cooperate with their tribes and battle the enemy. The growth of science and technology, foretold by the atomic bomb, means that we are now in a large global tribe with all other humans. Our shared enemy is the risk of nuclear and environmental catastrophe, but we can fight these threats together.
The call for increased unity, to transcend self-interest and tribal boundaries, comes from every culture and philosophy. Unity is the answer to our problems, and a discussion of it has been around for thousands of years. This is one of the reasons my grandfather quoted the Bhagavad Gita when describing the global change that atomic science ushered in. He said right after the first atomic blast, quote, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," end quote. The story of nuclear weapons and our failure to contain them can seem scary, even depressing. But I think that there is a reason for optimism. We can recognize our independence as a fact, as basic as nuclear fission. War is not practical anymore. We cannot have a total war without global annihilation. Robert Oppenheimer saw that in a bomb in the New Mexico desert in 1945. So why would we not cooperate on our real shared risks? We should focus on energy abundance and a transition from carbon-based energy rather than spending our money on outdated nuclear warfare systems. Although we have to accept some conflict, we cannot overcome the past that easily. We can contain it in healthy things, such as science, commerce, sports, and even politics. These are difficult things, of course. You can see the right thing to do, fight for it, and lose, as my grandfather did. But I see in his example of struggling both in war and in the aftermath, the duty to try. And good ideas, tried repeatedly, well, they have a way of lasting. I would like to share a closing quote from my grandfather from the lecture, The Open Mind. Quote, "It is in our hands to see the hope of the future is not lost." Please join me in seeing to it that ultimately my grandfather did not lose. Please join us in seeing to it that J.R. Oppenheimer's vision of unity and peace
finally bears
fruit, freeing us from a new and yet more dangerous nuclear arms race.
To share with us the perspective of the nuclear weapons programs and the new arms race, I welcome and introduce Jay Coghlan.
Hey, thank you all for being here. It's just so great to look out and see so many people. And You know, this is the movement building that Archbishop Wester's talking about, Alan Sanchez talking about, that we're all talking about, that if we get behind it, we can change the world. And this is the most important issue in the world. So we hope that we can all join together. Now, I have my faithful man here. There we go. We're at the right place. So obviously I'm Jay Coghlan with Nuclear Watch New Mexico. I have a reputation for speaking too long, so I just started my phone so I could time myself here. You know, first I wanted to go where Myrriah was speaking about how the land of enchantment ever since the dawn of the atomic age has essentially been a nuclear weapons colony. So if we could switch to that. And I'm going to start with what I think is a stunning economic fact. In this coming fiscal year 2024, which begins October 1st, the Department of Energy is going to spend $10 billion in this state alone. And the state's entire operating budget is $9.4 billion, you know, just to give you a sense of the economic presence of the Department of Energy in this state. And you know, you got to go from there. You got to ask the question, how much good does that really do the average New Mexican? And my answer is very, very little. And of that $10 billion, DOE is going to spend 70% of it on nuclear weapons and a large portion of the remainder on radioactive waste from producing nuclear weapons. At the same time, New Mexico has its dead last in public education, its dead last in child well-being. So I will leap to the obvious. I don't think the nuclear weapons industry has done or is doing that much good for the average New Mexican. Now, moving along. So what we have going on nowadays is a $2 trillion modernization program that's going to completely rebuild U.S. nuclear forces and at the same time promote, accelerate the arms race. Now, I'm not going to stand here and, you know, diss only the United States, and I'm going to say I'm a proud American. It's the best country in the world. No other country could have created rock and roll, for example. That's why this country is so good. But we're caught in a new nuclear arms race, and if we could move along, that is arguably even more dangerous than the first. And that is because, first of all, we got multiple nuclear actors now. It's not the simple bipolar structure. And I like the double entendre, the bipolar structure of the Cold War. It was insane. It was mad. It was mutually assured destruction. But nowadays, it's even more complex. With, as I say, multiple nuclear actors, and we now have hypersonic and cyber weapons and artificial intelligence that's going to have applications to the command and control of nuclear weapons. So, far more dangerous. Briefly, switch please. I don't want to be macabre, but here's some of the effects of a modern warhead on New York City. And I'm not going to read out all the details except for the bottom line. If there were an all-out exchange between Russia and the U.S., which, you know, hopefully is still remote, but nevertheless is growing more likely as time goes on, if there was an all-out exchange, expect 5 billion humans to starve because of nuclear winter. And this is a fact that has been suppressed by the nuclear weapons powers for decades. But when I say this is the most serious issue around, that's why I say this. And if we can move on to the next one. Now, Los Alamos is very clear to itself internally about what its main mission is. This is a laboratory slide. And, you know, I get the fluff pieces from the New Mexican, from the lab itself. Yes, it does some work on HIV. Yes, it does some work on climate change. The fact of the matter is 79% of LANL's nuclear weapons budget, $5 billion budget, is for core nuclear weapons research and production programs. And I like to quote Bob Dylan, "Money doesn't talk, it swears." And this is where the laboratory is really at. If we can move on. Here's a budget graph illustrating this. And you see the dramatic rise of nuclear weapons programs just in the last 3 years. Over the last decade, funding for nuclear weapons programs have doubled. And cleanup remains at around 6%. And, you know, the general population is quite enamored of renewables, et cetera. Well, renewable energy research at the laboratory is 0.02%. So it's absolutely minuscule. If we move on again. Now, the biggest reason that the laboratory is getting all of this money is because of expanded plutonium pit production. And I went to Russia once. My fact sheet was mistranslated. It was like pit was a hole in the ground, and I had a very puzzled Russian audience. But in this case, the pit is like the pit of a peach. It is the core, the critical, another intended pun. It is the critical component of nuclear weapons. And the laboratory's going big time on pit production. There'll be $1.7 billion spent on pit production in the coming fiscal year at Los Alamos. $1.7 billion in the coming fiscal year alone. Okay, now reasons why pit production is not necessary. This is the plan. 30 years, 30 pits per year at Los Alamos, redundant pit production of another 50 pits per year at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. So this is a massive endeavor. And then next slide. Now, reasons why pit production are not necessary. I'll jump to the bottom line, which I hope is the take-home point. There is absolutely no future pit production scheduled to maintain the safety and reliability of the existing nuclear weapons stockpile that's already been extensively tested. Instead, it is all for speculative new design nuclear weapons. So NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, is getting ready to spend $60 billion of your taxpayers' money over the next 30 years on pit production. But get this, again, I repeat, it is not to maintain the safety and reliability of existing weapons, it is for new designs. And why on earth are they doing this? Independent consultants, scientists called the Jasons, found in 2006 that plutonium pits last at least 100 years. And since that time, the government has essentially avoided coming out with updated pit aging studies. So this is one thing that Congress should insist that they do. Another problem, the Department of Energy has the singular distinction of being on the high-risk list for project mismanagement ever since the Government Accountability Office started that list in 1991. And just earlier this year, pit production is by far the most expensive, the most complex program that the National Nuclear Security Administration has ever done or is doing, but yet GAO found in January, NNSA, that is the government, does not have a credible cost estimate, nor does it have an integrated master schedule of pit production. So the pit production facility at Savannah in South Carolina is going to cost more than $20 billion. This is the second most expensive building in U.S. history. Now I'm getting the time signal, so got to get to what to do. First of all, go back and visit Nuke Watch, my organization in the back. Come back and visit our display. And we got some suggested actions, citizen action on pit reduction, such as the need for credible cost estimates, a new pit aging study. By the way, there should be a new programmatic environmental impact statement. There should be a new LANL site-wide environmental impact statement, which is happening, but it's going to exclude pit reduction, calling it a done deal. Congress should address that matter. So come back and speak to us about actions that you can take. And then just to close on last slide, I want to, to me it's a rhetorical question, but why is nuclear disarmament necessary? And, I'm going to have somebody more expert than myself answer that question. I'm going to have Robert McNamara, who was Defense Secretary during the Cuban Missile Crisis, answer that question. And the big take-home point that he said on that, he said, do not be mistaken about this. We survived the Cuban Missile Crisis only by luck. And as the Archbishop said earlier, and I'm stealing his line because it was an applause line, but luck is not a sustainable strategy, especially when we're talking about civilization-ending weapons. So here we are. We're building a movement. We're going on to Japan to continue that movement. We're going to the United Nations, just hoping all of you join us towards a future world free of nuclear weapons. And thank you for being here.
If that doesn't wake you up, I don't know what will, because I don't think we're going to be able to sleep with the nightmares of what we just saw there, but it wakes you up. The reality is in our face. The reality is in our face. To look at the radioactive waste issues in New Mexico, which we also know that the waste accompanies this production. And so to share with us on that, I would welcome and invite and introduce Don Hancock and Kevin Kamps.
Thank you very much. I join with everybody else in saying we really appreciate seeing so many people here. There's a lot that we can do. And so we want to talk about another facility, the third Department of Energy facility in New Mexico. You've heard about Los Alamos. We've heard a little bit about Sandia today. But there's a third Department of Energy facility in New Mexico. It's called WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. Unlike Los Alamos and Sandia that are supposed to be for this new nuclear weapons mission, WIP is not, but as we're going to see, that is also the plan that we need to work against. So next slide, please. So what is WIP? The Waste Isolation Pilot Plant since 1999 has been the world's only operating deep geologic repository for nuclear weapons. As you can see, it's in southeastern New Mexico in Eddy County. At the bottom right, you see the major nuclear weapons sites that have been shipping waste to WIP for these last 23 years. The point of all of this is that this is the only site, and it was for the Cold War nuclear weapons waste, the plutonium-contaminated waste. Why was WIP created? Because the pits for the Cold War nuclear weapons and the weapons that we still have were generated at the Rocky Flats plant in Colorado. Folks in Colorado, this is an important point, people and state officials can make changes in the policy. Folks in Colorado thought it wasn't a good idea to have their waste there. So as you can see what happened to it, it got shipped up to the Idaho desert where it was dumped into the ground. Folks in Idaho didn't think that was a very good idea either. They said, you've got to dig this up and get it out of here, and it's come to WIP. Next slide. So there's a lot of history here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but several points are important. I've mentioned citizen and state action have changed the government plans, Colorado and Idaho. In New Mexico, importantly, WIP was early on going to be for all this waste, not just plutonium-contaminated waste from pit production, but other kinds of waste. The state legislature, people of New Mexico said, no, that's not going to happen, which is why it's not for that yet. But that's, again, a future plan that we have to look out for. The bottom line, 1992, Congress passed the WIP Land Withdrawal Act. 1992, Rocky Flats closed in 1989. Congress knew in 1992 that the waste that had been generated at Rocky Flats and other places for Cold War would fill up the WIP capacity that they said WIP had. So Congress knew from the beginning there needed to be other repositories. Next slide. But the Department of Energy, for the last 30 years, rather than working on other repositories, has been thinking about how to make a bigger WIP for more waste. But they haven't wanted to tell us about all this detail, right? Oh, we're going to comply with that 1992 law. Well, actually, they're not. From 2018 to 2020, scientists at the National Academy of Sciences, looking at DOE documents, including classified ones, said, hey, what their plans are not just to bring the legacy waste to WIP, but to also bring waste from what? New pit production at Los Alamos and Savannah River that Jay talked about, and also bring some of the plutonium pits that are at Pantex, bring them to Los Alamos, and then send them to South Carolina. So what does that bigger WIP look like? Next slide. This is the WIP site as it currently exists, 8 panels as they're called. The big WIP is more than double the size. That's the plan. Next. But things can be different, as I've already said. People can say no to plutonium pit production. People can say no to bringing Pantex plant surplus plutonium to WIP. We have decision makers who can make a difference. The New Mexico Environment Department has permits at both Los Alamos and Sandia that can affect these future. The governor of New Mexico has a consultation and cooperation agreement that Congress said should happen 40 years ago that's still in place. So the governor has a variety of tools. The Attorney General has legal actions that he can take and congressional action can happen. Last slide. So if you're interested in this, stopforeverwip.org is the website. We have people from many organizations that are working to stop this WIP expansion here, and we would appreciate your support. And we're targeted, as I've implied, for some other waste, not at WIP, but Kevin Kamps is going to address that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to speak. My name is Kevin Kamps with Beyond Nuclear. We're based in Tacoma Park, Maryland. We border Washington, D.C., and Tacoma Park is a nuclear-free zone. So I would just like to start with a couple dates. On April 1st of 2017, Holtec held a press conference on Capitol Hill announcing its license application to open the largest high-level radioactive waste dump in the world in southeastern New Mexico. April 1st, Nuclear Fool's Day, 2017. But it was no joke. And then on July 16th of 2018, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission docketed the application and the unfolding proceedings in the Federal Register. And I found that date, given Church Rock, given Trinity, to be remarkably tone deaf to the point of ghoulishness by the NRC. So what is this consolidated interim storage facility? I'm wearing the t-shirt designed by Noel Marquez, a co-founder of Alliance for Environmental Strategies in southeastern New Mexico. And what I'm going to mostly talk about is Holtec in New Mexico. But the Texas dump, you need to know, is right on the border of New Mexico. In fact, it's 0.3 miles away. And the water flows into New Mexico from it. So, next slide. I'd just like to point out that this was a very big moment when Senate Bill 53 was passed on St. Patrick's Day of this year. Representative McQueen, Senator Steinborn, Governor Lujan Grisham let the federal government and Holtec know that this is not consent-based. Texas passed a similar law in 2021. And so the federal government sort of recognizes this, and they have launched, unfortunately, a program called consent-based siting for federal as opposed to private, which Holtec and the Texas dump claim to be, consolidated interim storage facilities for high-level radioactive waste. And wouldn't you know, the Department of Energy has tapped Holtec, of all companies, to be a consortium lead, one of 13 consortia, to explore this idea, to promote this idea of consent-based siting. But of course, they've been violating the consent of New Mexico for several long years now. And yeah, next slide. Another aspect of this problem is that it is not environmentally just. And remarkably, the Department of Energy's new program that they are holding another meeting on July 25th to unveil these consortia, to explain to the public what consent-based siting means. They are packaging it as an environmental justice initiative. And yet there are several, in addition to Holtec's environmental injustice of targeting a majority-minority state, and Jay laid out the social economic problems of this state, and this map by Deborah Reed and others is so helpful to show the disproportionate burden that New Mexico has borne since Los Alamos opened in 1942. Also the fossil fuel industry. So to package it as an environmental justice initiative, and there's involvement by the University of New Mexico in this program as well as a junior partner. So we have to let them know that this is not, opening a high-level radioactive waste dump is not an environmental justice initiative. And there are several Native American tribes and associations and other organizations involved in this as well. So we're very concerned that, like at Mescalero Apache in the 1980s and 1990s, when the Department of Energy and a private initiative tried to do this in the past, consolidated interim storage, this is not environmental justice. Next slide. So an aspect, a non-starter of consolidated interim storage is that it multiplies the transportation risks. So think East Palestine, Ohio, with high-level radioactive waste on board. Severe accidents, terrorist attacks. These are mobile Chernobyls. These are dirty bombs on wheels. These are, in terms of barge shipments, which are proposed, floating Fukushimas. But the routine, so-called, the incident-free, so-called shipments are like mobile X-ray machines that can't be turned off. They give off gamma, they give off neutron, even when nothing goes wrong. Next slide. And so this map is worth its weight in gold to us because the companies, Holtec in New Mexico, Interim Storage Partners in Texas, have largely to entirely kept the transportation routes secretive that are going to be used. Now, why is that? Because in the Yucca Mountain, Nevada dump fight, Nevada's and the environmental movements and the Western Shoshone Indian Nations' biggest tool was to wake up the country. That when you live when you live along these routes, it's like living in Nevada. The same is true here. When it comes to high-level radioactive waste transportation, we all live, or most of the lower 48 lives along these likely routes. So I got the signal there. I just wanted to close with saying that the resistance against Holtec began immediately. In fact, it already existed before. I mentioned there was a private initiative in Utah on an Indian reservation. Holtec was involved. It was going to supply the containers for high-level radioactive waste. And even though the NRC licensed that dump, it was still stopped. So even though the NRC has licensed the Texas dump, even though on May 9th it licensed the New Mexico dump, we can still stop it. We have federal appeals on Holtec about to go forward. And the very last slide, I believe, has to do with Holtec's corruption. They've been implicated in bribery. They then lied about it under oath. They've largely to entirely gotten away with their criminal behavior. They have major problems with quality assurance, with their design, with their fabrication of the containers. Most recently, and I'll close on this, late breaking news just last weekend, Holtec's chief financial officer was fired recently. And he alleges, and it's not yet gone to court, but he has filed legal papers, that he was asked to lie on behalf of Holtec, to be a part of a business deal with Hyundai of South Korea to promote Holtec's small modular nuclear reactor development. His name is Kevin O'Rourke. He was chief financial officer. He's filed a whistleblower protection lawsuit. And of critical importance to this dump in New Mexico, he is saying that the actual Holtec projections are, and we did not know any of this, like the transportation routes, the finances were very secretive, that Holtec is going to lose $150 million a year for the first 5 years on this consolidated interim storage facility. That adds up to $750 million of losses. And Holtec, the CEO, Krishna Singh, had asked Kevin O'Rourke to let Hyundai know that they were going to break even on that. So this company cannot be trusted, certainly with something as dangerous as high-level radioactive waste. And please know the resistance continues. Please say thanks to the governor. Check with your state legislators. Find out how they voted on SB 53. If they voted the right way, please thank them. If they voted the wrong way, please educate them. And please urge them to keep on fighting, because this fight has to continue. We have to win this fight. And it continues with the Department of Energy funding Holtec with federal taxpayer dollars. We have to fight that initiative as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very educational. We are, I think, in the right position now to talk about what do we do and to have a call to action. And to call us to that action, I'd like to introduce and call back to the microphone Tina Cordova and Danny Hall.
So when we started out on this journey to put together this event, we envisioned being able to share histories with you, the history that Myrriah shared, the history that I shared, the history that was shared by Larry King, and the history that we are basically asked to do so much in this state around this industry. And we have never given permission for all of this. We've never been asked for permission for any part of this, and we've resisted. And this is not the time for us to back off of that resistance. When you hear about the storage of high-level waste coming on rail cars from other places to our state, you have to realize that that is not a sustainable process, and that we should not be asked to embrace that, to accept that. We have to stand strong against it. So what I'm asking you is, after you've heard these histories, after you've heard the histories of how the uranium miners were taken advantage of in places like Laguna and Acoma and the Navajo Nation, when you've heard that people lived as close as 12 miles to a nuclear test site at Trinity and they were never warned before or afterwards, when you hear that the government is going to bring high-level waste here even though we're fully against it, you have to stand strong. And Representative Ledger Fernandez reminded me of something before she left. She said, ask them to reach out to their family and friends across the country and ask them also to support our efforts. Right now, we can't get, as an example, the RICA amendments passed in Congress because we can't get enough support from the Republicans in affected states. So it's not just that we have to call our members of Congress, we have to actually ask our family and friends who live other places to call their members of Congress too. And now that we've shared all of this history with you, you cannot remain complacent, because if you do, you're complicit in the problem. And so join with us. Promise to reach out to all our members, our 5 supportive members of Congress, and let them know that these are issues of concern to you. Our governor recently told us in a face-to-face meeting, they're not going to bring high-level waste here as long as I'm governor. She said, I don't care how many lawsuits I have to file or defend, it's not going to happen. But I'm not going to be governor forever. Right? Make sure you vote. Your vote counts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Danny.
Thank you, Tina. I guess first I just want to say thank you to everyone. I'm so inspired to see this community that has already been through so much rise up again and again and sound the alarm to help warn the world of the threat of nuclear war. The work of eliminating all nuclear weapons is a great challenge, but it is precisely because it's difficult that it is worthwhile and can bring so much meaning to our lives and so much good into the world. As John F. Kennedy said, we do things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And let us have no doubt that we can do this. Earlier this month, the United States destroyed the last of its chemical weapons stockpile, marking the first time globally, yes, marking the first time globally that an entire class of weapons of mass destruction has been eliminated. We can do this. We are not slaves to the tools of our own making. Human beings built nuclear weapons, and we can take them apart. These are little machines about the size of the chairs that you're sitting in today. We've already dismantled more than 50,000 of them. We simply have lacked the political will to dismantle the 13,000 that remain. And that is where we all come in. It is up to us to create the political will, and we can do that. We know that because people have done it before, in the 1980s when people ended the Cold War arms race. Margaret Mead was right when she said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. With this confidence, I invite you to visit the information tables here after our closing prayer and reflection. At these tables, you can learn about what actions each of us can take right now. For example, we can contact our congressional representatives and ask them to co-sponsor House Resolution 77, titled Embracing the Goals and Provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. 34 members of Congress have already co-sponsored, and the more co-sponsors we get, the closer we get to reaching the first critical tipping point when we can hold congressional briefings, educate additional members of Congress about the catastrophic civilization-ending consequences of even a so-called limited nuclear war. We can support congressional leaders with the vision and the political courage to speak the inconvenient truth to power that nuclear deterrence is an unsustainable policy, dependent on luck with a horrifying and morally unacceptable history of accidents and miscalculations. We can make it a real debate in Congress, and we can make the urgent need to eliminate nuclear weapons before they eliminate us, and the need to usher in a new security environment that is not dependent on weapons that can end human civilization, a national security priority. You can also join forces with the National Grassroots Back from the Brink Coalition. With support from Back from the Brink, you can spur your local towns, cities, counties, and state legislative bodies to pass Back from the Brink resolutions that urge the U.S. government to adopt the Back from the Brink policy prescriptions for reducing the risk of nuclear war, prioritizing negotiations with the other nuclear-armed states for the complete elimination of all nuclear weapons, and address local priorities, such as expansion and extension of the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, and canceling plans to expand plutonium production at the Los Alamos National Laboratory and WIPP. And faith groups, you can sign an interfaith letter to Congress calling for many of these actions. A letter is going to be delivered after the nationwide theatrical release of the film Oppenheimer at the end of next week. This letter has already been signed by the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, the National Council of Churches, the Episcopal Church, and many others. And you can take many of these actions online using simple one-click templates on the Back from the Brink website at preventnuclearwar.org. If you go back to that table back there labeled Legislative Outreach, you can actually sign a postcard that will then be hand-delivered to your representative in Congress, urging them to support House Resolution 77. If you go to our merchandise table outside and choose to purchase something, those funds will support our downwinder communities. So please take action. In closing, we have heard some words of wisdom from many faith traditions today. So let me end by adding some from my own Soka Gakkai Nichiren Buddhist tradition. Soka Gakkai International founding president Daisaku Ikeda has stated, "A great human revolution in just a single individual will help achieve a change in the destiny of a nation, and further will enable a change in the destiny of all humankind." This is precisely the action the world demands from each of us at this moment. So today, let us begin anew a great inner revolution in each of our lives and launch a personal nuclear abolition campaign in each of our communities that will change the destiny of our nation and help save all humankind. And I thank you.
Thank you for being with us here this evening, this afternoon. And before we move to the prayer, I want to remind you, if you'll please fill out the evaluation form and turn that in. It would help us for future programs. After the prayer, we'll have music to enjoy. You can visit the tables and do some networking. So with that, I'd like to call us to be coming back into prayer. And Reverend Talitha Arnold, will you please lead us in that?
And also, Archbishop, please come forward. We don't need the podium. No. Yeah, we do need the mic. Yeah, we just don't need the podium. Thanks. It has been a very, very full afternoon, and I thank you all for being here and for being willing to engage these really challenging topics. Just a word about the next few minutes. Again, I will ask us to come together with the breath that God would offer us, however it is we understand that mystery. Then Archbishop Wester will offer a closing prayer. I will offer the spoken benediction. And then Kiara is going to lead us in another version of this little light of mine that is audience participation, or congregation participation, as you might call it. And then after that, we're going to be blessed with the music of Paul Pino and his incredible Downwinder Band. So thank you. And also, earlier in the program, I forgot to mention and to thank John Patrick Funk for the music that he offered as we gathered and also in between the break. Thank you. In the Hebrew language and in the Jewish tradition, the word for peace is shalom, and it doesn't mean the absence of conflict. It really truly means the fullness of life. It's very similar in its understanding to the Navajo Dene understanding of Hojone, blessing, the fullness of life, the fullness of life. We've heard a lot today about the precariousness of that life and the vulnerability of that life for individuals, for communities, and indeed for this whole world. But I think it's important that we close with breathing into our lives yet once again, giving thanks to the source of all life, that shalom, that hope, and that love. So let us breathe in as fully and deeply as we can the blessing of peace, the blessing of shalom, the blessing of Hojoni. Let us breathe in to the depths of our souls the blessing of hope that casts out all shadow. And let us breathe in deeply the blessing of love that casts out all fear. And thanks be to the source of all this blessing.
Implicit in this prayer will be the hope that we can gather this way next year on July 16th to commemorate and to share our hopes for the future of peace and nuclear disarmament. And I also wish to include all of us, regardless of our faith tradition or our own tradition, in this prayer. So please join in your own way as we pray together. Loving God, we ask you to look kindly upon us this day as we acknowledge you as the giver of every good gift. And we thank you, God, for the beauty of your creation, the harmony, the peace, the tranquility, the depth of the beauty that reflects your goodness in our lives. We particularly thank you for creating us in your very image and likeness, that you have given us the grace to understand more deeply your love in our lives and how you long for us to love you in return and to love one another. And we express, loving God, our shame and our sorrow, our penitence for what we've done to your creation, for the ways in which we've destroyed it, and for the potential of destroying it completely. We thank you and we pray that you will give us the grace we need to do real penance, to be convinced of the need to protect those who have already been harmed by nuclear weapons, and to protect our planet, our civilization, all of us, all sentient beings. And so we ask your grace and blessing in this difficult work, this challenging work, confident that your Holy Spirit hovers over all of us, and that deep within the soil of the earth that we inhabit abides your Holy Spirit. There's a dear freshness deep down things. And though the dark west, the light went, dawn at the brown brink eastward springs. Sustain that hope in us, Lord. Sustain us and make us be instruments of your peace. Amen.
And now, my beloved friends, sisters, brothers, kindred, neighbors, may you go out into this world and be in this world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return no one evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering. Honor all persons, honor all creation. Love and serve, rejoicing in the power of the Holy Spirit. And may the God of love, the God of hope, and the God of peace be with us and this world now and forevermore. Go in peace. Amen.
Amen.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's celebrate this coming together, and please sing along with me. Yeah? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. One more. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine.